Okay, so hi everyone, welcome. This is basically an interview about and like a Q&A about deepfakes and how they have been impacting our society and like ways of remediation for the problem at hand. And we're here with Mr. Jacob Hoffman Andrews, if he'd like to introduce himself.
Sure, thank you. My name is Jacob Hoffman Andrews. I'm an EFF senior staff technologist. EFF is an organization protecting civil liberties in the digital realm. I've been at EFF for about 10 years. I work largely on our Encrypt the Web project, specifically helping more websites become HTTPS so your data is safe in transit. Hi there, Filene. Thanks for the chat. Um, and I also work on our AI working group, and I'm particularly interested in the problem of deepfakes, and particularly as it um, applies to non-consensual intimate imagery. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to chat with you all today. Thank you for the invite.
All right. To kick us off, our first question is what, in your own words, what do you think is the current state of deepfakes? And in the next 5 years, how do you see it advancing?
Yeah, so I think right now, deepfakes I think originated as a term mainly applying to video, and I think has broadened to incorporate images as well. Um, And so I think, the state of deepfakes today is it's actually very easy to generate an image of kind of whatever you want with close to photo quality. Um, and for videos, the original concept that the deepfakes was applied to, which was actually the name of a Reddit user back then, was essentially taking an existing video and modifying it in some way, commonly like putting a different person's face in. So that's getting pretty sophisticated. You can make quite good videos. And I think, as I understand it today, it's still, it still requires some technical expertise. The major AI providers are working towards kind of full service video generation tools, much like you have a full service, Dolly image generator. They want you to be able to do video generation. But I think, in terms of uh, the stuff that I'm most concerned about in terms of non-consensual intimate imagery, I think the major providers here are like fairly aware of that. So I'm like hopeful that say OpenAI Sora will be will have safeguards in place around images that it detects as nudity or sexually suggestive in various ways. But I think there is kind of a burgeoning underground of people developing models specifically for these abusive purposes.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like a huge problem, like especially in schools, like it's becoming an increasingly large problem. Like people have been like spreading around like deep fakes, especially in New Jersey. There's been a lot of cases. And our organization is actually like kind of working to implement safeguards within schools itself because like often like schools have like policies for cyberbullying and also like sexual harassment, but nothing specific to deepfakes. So
Mhm.
in the past, it hasn't really been handled very well at all. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely a pretty big
Yeah,
idea.
I'd be really curious to hear more of that. My understanding it matches what you're saying, that kind of a lot of the frontline abuse and where people are experiencing this the most is in schools. And, is this something that the schools you're in have experienced, and how have they handled it? And how are they applying these new policies? What do those policies look like?
So like the most notable case was a case in Westfield, New Jersey, where like a girl on her like senior prom night, like some other people spread some like deepfake generated intimate images of her. And
Hmm.
like the school, like Westfield High School, didn't really handle it very well. And also like I've heard some cases where in some schools like they kind of like announce it on the loudspeaker and stuff like that. So it was kind of a very bad handling of the situation because like we've never seen anything like it before in like especially with the rise of like AI and deepfakes. And
Hmm.
so our organization like wrote a policy memo which specifically like handles the specific case of deepfakes and puts them equivalent to cyberbullying or sexual harassment, and we're basically trying to go around to different school districts and having some people from our organization testify, and also like having like trying to implement those safeguards at like board meetings to see if we could handle the situation better.
That's great. Have the schools been receptive so far?
It's kind of like a new thing that our organization's doing, so we're still trying to reach out. But I believe some schools have had responses and have started implementing them.
That's great work. I hope it continues to see success.
Thank
Um,
you.
and the example you mentioned of announcing this embarrassing event over the loudspeaker, it seems like that's something that could go into the updated policy of like, here's how to handle this gently and with care. Is that something you're working into your example language?
Yes, yeah.
Nice.
And like I think a huge issue is actually detecting whether something is a deep fake. And watermarking is like something that people have been talking about as a solution, but it also has like some vulnerabilities or like issues. So we were wondering what you thought about like what the major weaknesses of watermarking the images are and how we would like work around that.
Yeah. So I think one of the issues in public discourse about deepfakes has been, there's kind of at least two, definitely more than two, but at least like two major areas that people are interested in and concerned about. One is like political deepfakes, faking a video of your opponent kicking a dog or, saying something that's totally against their policy. And the other is the non-consensual intimate imagery or deepfake porn. And they kind of have different like threat models, different problems that you're trying to prevent. And people have really focused on the political deepfakes. And the idea here is, you would put together a convincing image or a convincing video that says something false about the world. And you would trick people into voting for or voting against a specific candidate based on that. And of course, people already do this with Photoshop, or actually more commonly, just taking a real image and presenting it out of context, showing a picture of one humanitarian disaster and saying it applies to whatever disaster is going on at the moment. And so one of the like obvious ideas that appeals to people is, well, what if we could just detect every fake image, right? So we could label it on social media. Maybe we could block it on social media, or at least, probably more realistically, label it so people would know this doesn't present a true vision of the world. So the concept of watermarking is probably quite familiar if you've ever visited like stock photography site. They put words across the image in kind of like grayish text. That's a watermark. But of course, the companies making, say, DALL-E and Midjourney and these products that create images or create videos, they want these videos to be usable for a general purpose. They want you to be able to use it in a production movie or as the cover of your magazine or the header on your blog. And so you don't want it covered with all this stuff. So there's a concept of invisible watermarking, which has been around for a long time. It's also that in itself is a form of steganography or hiding messages within other outer innocent messages. One example of steganography would be if you wrote a letter to somebody that seemed to be boring updates about your day, but if you look at the third letter of every sentence, those come together to make a sentence with your true message, which is something you maybe want to hide in plain sight. Steganography is different than encryption in that if you know the technique, you can pull out the message, whereas with encryption, you would actually have to have the secret key. So with invisible watermarks, which is kind of what people have discussed to help verify the falsity of certain images or video content or text content, the idea is you make some small modifications that are not perceivable. So you could imagine for each pixel of the image, you say, well, okay, is this kind of a teal-ish color? Well, I'm going to shift it like one small increment towards the blue. And if it's a reddish color, I'm going to shift it an orangish color, I'm going to shift it one tiny increment towards the red. And you go through the whole image and you say, okay, on average, it's a little more red than I would expect, a little more blue than I would expect in these color ranges, just as an example. And you could kind of detect something of that. And there's quite sophisticated methods out there and that can not only express one bit of information, this was AI generated, but can actually encode data. It could say what generated it, what date, what the model was, et cetera. Um, and these watermarks have actually been designed to be pretty robust. You could crop out just a part of the image, and because the watermark is repeated over and over again, it would still be detectable. You could rotate the image up to like 30 degrees. On one example, invisible watermark tool I saw. You rotate the image up to 30 degrees and it will still be detectable. Well, I mean, what happens if you rotate it more than that? The issue is these techniques tend to yeah, content credentials. I'm going to touch on that. That's an excellent point. So these tend to be robust against kind of non-adversarial attacks. The idea is, oh, you copy pasted this image, or maybe you tweaked it a little, adjusted the lighting, it's still detectable. But in the case of political deepfakes, you're actually dealing with an adversarial environment, right? You're imagining somebody here who's trying to spread false information in the world. And when they generate an image from an AI tool, and they post it on social media and it gets labeled as AI, obviously they don't want that. And it's worth some effort on their part to get rid of that. So, what if you had a tool that took the watermarked output from an AI image, removed the watermark, but kept the image looking basically the same, then you could post it and it would be non-detected. And so far, for all the existing methods of watermarking, they have been breakable. In other words, it would not be hard to develop such a tool. So you can imagine this as kind of an automated pipeline. You generate an image, you strip out the watermark data, and then you post it. So kind of the holy grail of invisible watermarking for detecting deepfakes is one that just can't be removed, or it can't be removed without damaging the image so much that like it's not a useful image anymore. And I think there's good reason to believe that that probably won't be achieved. Part of the reason is when you generate an image like this, you get the whole bytes of the image and you can manipulate them as you see fit. You can adjust the color levels or adjust the encoding. And presumably you also have access to the deepfake detector tool. Because if people in general don't have access to the detector tool, it's not very useful, not very powerful. So you can get your fake images and you can tweak them at a very low level and check them against the deepfake detector until it suddenly says, oh, no, this is normal. You can go back and forth in this automated way. And in fact, you can even train a less powerful AI to do that. The other problem with the concept of we'll detect all the fake images with watermarks is it relies on the idea that there are only a few big powerful models that generate images or video, and they all are subject to this requirement or voluntarily implement this requirement. But actually, it's only getting easier to make these models over time. And I think, in particular, as countries continue to be interested in political manipulation of rivals, particularly extraterritorially, they're going to have their own models and they're going to say, well, okay, for our internal use in developing disinformation campaigns, we're not going to add watermarks. Why would we? It goes against our interest. Filene mentioned content credentials, which I think is it's very interesting in that it's often talked about as watermarking, but it's actually kind of the flip side of this. So you think of watermarking for AI generated content, pardon me, as what if we could detect all the fake content? And content credentials is kind of like, what if we could detect all the real content? Setting aside the issues of what is real, and we've known how to convincingly lie with cameras for ever since cameras were invented. But the idea there is, you have a physical camera and it has cryptographic credentials baked into it in the firmware when it's manufactured. And so every image from that camera can be signed. And so you could prove, imagine you're a journalist and you go out taking photos with this camera, and then someone later says, they're lying. They made up those images with AI. You could say, look, here's the signature. And you can prove with Sony or whoever made my camera that this signature came from a real camera they manufactured. And actually, Adobe makes this a little more sophisticated because they say, we're going to take that signature, and when you use our editing tools to adjust the lighting or do some smudging or make things just a little clear, remove distracting things from the background, we'll retain the metadata of all those changes and the original signature. So even photojournalism includes actually a lot of editing, and that editing is generally benign. It preserves kind of the intent and meaning of the photograph. But somebody could go in assuming the photo editor used the right software and see, oh, this was edited, but I can see what ways it was edited in and know that they're benign. And that's interesting. That actually works. Like, I think there's reasons to believe watermarks will always be breakable, be removable. Because this technique relies on cryptography, which is actually like quite strong, and there's kind of a robust threat model. If we want to preserve the signature, it'll work. Now, importantly, it also relies on aligned incentives. Somebody who wanted to take a real signed image and make it look like it was not signed, they can strip the signature easily. But nobody has the incentive to do that. The journalist, the editor, they all want to preserve the indication that they took an original legitimate photo. So like that's why that aspect works. Now, the other interesting development that I have noticed lately is AI companies have actually started using content credentials as a form of metadata just to express this was generated with AI, which is a reasonable thing to do. It is removable, right? So a malicious person using AI to deceive could like just strip out the content credentials and then it wouldn't indicate it was made with AI. But what it does work well for, in my opinion, is kind of accidental misinformation. So somebody generated a picture of a beautiful rainbow duck that doesn't exist. And then they shared it with their friends saying, this is AI. And then one of their friends reshared it and said, look at this beautiful duck. And pretty soon it's been reshared so many times, people are being like, this amazing duck exists in the Northwest woods of the United States and it's endangered and all these things, and it doesn't exist. But if this metadata accompanied it throughout, that would somewhat reduce the spread of this accidental misinformation, but it doesn't really work to prevent intentional disinformation. Does that make sense? Any
Yeah,
questions about watermarking and all that?
yeah, that's really interesting because like with the camera approach, like whether the data is like baked into the like when they took the photo, that's kind of like establishing what's real rather than what's fake. But
Right.
also that also requires like a change in kind of like the infrastructure, right? Like all the cameras would have to have that kind of feature involved.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's my other critique of this approach is I think we probably won't get to the point where every camera has this feature. Although, we might see in surprising amount because so many photos now are taken on phones and so many phones now have on an iPhone, it's called a secure element. On Android devices, it's often called something different, but the idea is kind of a core high security chip on which there are, cryptographic keys that could be used to sign things of this sort. So we might see more adoption of that, but I think it would be problematic in 10 years if we said we only allow posting of images that are signed all the way to the phone that took it for a number of reasons. One, still not all phones or cameras or whatever will have these features. These features require really sophisticated editing tools that are expensive, like from Adobe, in order to preserve the signature through editing. And maybe most importantly, this signature scheme relies on the fact that you don't want to be anonymous, that as a photographer, you want to like prove that your specific camera took this specific picture. But actually anonymous photography can be really important.
Yeah, like also like anonymity on the internet is kind of like a core right because like of but there's also like it's also difficult to figure out what the role of like app ecosystems or like social media platforms like what their role is because our organization took a stance that like they should be the ones who like moderate the content on their platforms despite there being like some legal issues like section 230 and
Mhm.
other things like that. So like do you think that they should be the ones who put like a set of like ethical or technical standards on like the content or whether they should be the ones to restrict it?
Yeah. I mean, pretty much any platform today does have content moderation guidelines and requirements. And sometimes they have more of them and sometimes they have fewer. Sometimes those requirements are better thought out. Sometimes they're very poorly thought out. We saw recently with Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter that he kind of threw away a lot of moderation rules that he thought were misguided or he just didn't like. And as a result, the platform got a lot more hateful content on it, and also lost a lot of advertisers. There's definitely a place for moderation. When EFF talks about, content moderation, it's a fairly nuanced topic, but one of the things we talk about is the set of necessary and proportionate principles, that these rules should be necessary and they should be proportionate. You should know why your content was removed, and you should have the ability to appeal. One of the really interesting things about Section 230 is it was actually part of why that was written into law was because prior to it, platforms were in this uncertain zone of, if we moderate content at all, does that suddenly make us responsible for content we fail to moderate? For instance, say we take down all death threats, but we missed one. Are we now liable for that? So Section 230 essentially says the person who made the death threat is liable for that death threat. And then within that, it is up to the platform to decide, what, we ban death threats on the platform, and we're going to do the best thing we can do to prevent them, a priori, get them reported, have a staff that looks and takes down things that are not allowed. But inevitably, because there are tools on the internet that allow somebody to post a message and have it be immediately available to everyone, there are things that will go out before the platform is able to catch it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I did have one question, trying to shift over to the legality side of it. Where do you see the fine line between government regulation and platform self-regulation in addressing like the abuse issues?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for the problem of non-consensual intimate imagery specifically, I think this is a rapidly evolving area. We can look at, where are the places we'd like to intervene in this problem? One classic solution is, well, the person who generated these could be criminally liable. That is satisfying. It's an abusive behavior, and in theory that deters conduct. On the other hand, we've seen that, um, using the criminal justice system doesn't always actually like produce the change in behavior we want to see. And more importantly, it like actually takes a long time to produce justice. And really what people want is actually for these images not to be produced of them in the first place. And so you get kind of interventions along the like with the law, there's potential criminal penalties, you could have civil penalties, you could have platforms doing takedowns, you could have kind of image generators being having restrictions in place, and also having harder to operate an abusive image generator. One example of that restrictions in place, for instance, one of the more notorious examples of non-consensual intimate imagery abuse was when Taylor Swift had a number of images generated of her last January. And that was actually, I think of the tools that do these as kind of off of the mainstream a little bit, but that was actually using a tool by Microsoft. I think it was Microsoft Creator, and they just kind of completely failed to like put in the appropriate safeguards. And later they kind of fixed it up. They're like, wow, that was bad. We fixed it. But I think that's kind of number one of the big companies that have plenty of money. They have plenty of staff to work on these things. They have plenty of staff to do moderation. They do have policies in place in general, and they need to do a better job of enforcing those policies and building them into their software. The on the legal side of things, there's actually we have 10 minutes left on the meeting. Cool. On the legal side of things, I know a number of states are introducing legislation to deal with deepfakes. And also there's some legislation being proposed at the national level. It's going to be interesting to see how all of those play out. They all approach things a little differently. I think one of the challenges is I think it's probably more useful to have there's so many interests involved, and so there's a tendency to glom everything into one bill. So one interest is politicians don't want false statements made about them using AI. And they care a lot about that. They care a lot about the integrity of the political system. Actors or specifically movie studios don't want images to be made or videos made of actors or like from old footage that they control. So they kind of want some rights around that. And then like people, mostly women and girls, don't want images made of them that are humiliating in sexual ways. And sticking all these into one bill often generates a bad bill, or a bill that like has issues that could easily be avoided. And I think what we need are really more narrowly targeted bills. And in particular, between these categories, what I've been interested to see is we had a very hotly contested election in the US when deepfake technology is pretty available. And while there were fake images, fake audio, various fakes out there, it didn't actually seem to be like a dominant issue in the election. And to me, it seems like this issue of non-consensual intimate imagery abuse is more urgent, and you can develop a more narrow targeted bill. The interests involved are narrow enough that you could craft a bill that passes First Amendment strict scrutiny, and you could design a bill with the appropriate penalties and ways to prevent this, and the appropriate remedies. And then kind of in the middle is the platforms and ad ecosystems. So, by the way, I highly recommend the news site 404 Media. They are a newly formed journalism co-op from some really talented tech journalists who split off from their various employers. They're independent. They're fully subscription funded. It's $100 a year. And if you can read a lot of their stuff without a subscription, they have done a lot of really good reporting on these issues. And one of the things I've noticed in the reporting is that a lot of the NCII abuse we're seeing today comes from like nudify apps. Take a picture of somebody, and then the app can generate an image of what this person would look like without clothes. And what they found is actually often these apps are being promoted in using advertising ecosystems on major providers like Apple and Google, even though those providers have policies specifically against them. And so what we're seeing there is there's policies in place. Everybody agrees like this type of abuse is bad and you want to stop it. And also the sites that produce this kind of abuse are bad and they shouldn't be advertised on, using these powerful platforms. But they just kind of aren't devoting the staff and the attention to catch these in advance. So for instance, the reporters at 404 Media have like found examples of these apps being promoted and contacted the companies, and they've said, oh, great, we took those down. Can you find any more? Which these companies should be proactively saying, wow, that's great. We're going to develop an internal task force to make sure we can find these before somebody externally has to find them. And similarly, I think a lot of them have content policies around spreading them. So there's both, you can spread links to, and I say apps casually, I think actually more often they're websites. The platforms do tend to be kind of good at like screening for apps they want to take down. But then also advertising for websites or linking to a website from your app is kind of a way to be a little harder to detect. And then there's also like posting links, just individual users promoting these content, which again, we get back to the question of content moderation rules. What are sites users allowed to post? And those generally, again, are restrictive, but they may not be catching them. One of the issues that seems to also be prevalent is you can imagine an app. So one category is take an image and generate a matching image of what a person might look like with their clothes off. Another is take an image of a person who does have their clothes off and swap the face with another one. And the policies on some of the platforms right now is, oh, well, face swap apps, like as a general thing, like fine. But if it's specifically promoted as a pornographic tool or a tool to generate NCII, then that's banned, right? We don't allow that behavior. And so you'll find tools that are like on their official page or in their official advertisement, they're like, oh, we're just this innocent face swap app, like see what you would look like in a different outfit. But then actually they're going and buying ads on porn sites. And on the porn site, they say, see anybody you want with their clothes off, like use our app. And so, use our website. And so if you can make that match up and figure out, okay, this app is actually promoting and intended for abusive purposes, then you can get it taken down. But that's something 404 has found that some of the major platforms haven't been doing reliably. And hopefully they're improving.
All right. Just to close things off, since we only have 4 minutes left, in your opinion, how might advancements in deepfake technology influence cybersecurity measures, particularly concerning identity verification and fraud prevention?
So, AI has been, today when we talk about AI, often we're talking about like generative AI. It's kind of the newest wave of what's possible. sorry. Let me double check on your question. Were you asking specifically about deepfakes or about AI in general?
Just about deepfakes affecting cybersecurity.
Oh, now, okay, yes, I see. So yeah, one of the issues, which you're probably alluding to here, is that there are some requirements of like know your customer that financial firms have, and you know, times when you need to verify somebody remotely, verify their identity. Another example would be, say you run IT for a big company and you have employees all over the place. Some of them are working from home and they get locked out of their accounts and they need to get reset. You could call them on the phone, but A, you don't know what their voice sounds like, and B, the voice is fakeable. You can call them up on video, which is a little more common, and you can ask them to put up an ID, but that's also becoming much more fakeable. There have been some really great demos there. Um, it's not really 100% clear how to improve that. I think remote identity verification of people you don't already know is always going to be pretty hard. But the concept behind content credentials of having a trusted camera that has that can sign its output is a potentially useful tool to say, okay, not only did I collect a video of this person saying, my name is blah, and I have this account, and here's my ID, you can say, okay, and this was signed by a chip manufactured by this company, which means it was probably not generated by an AI. On the slightly broader topic of, well, we have 2 minutes left, but on the slightly broader topic of generative AI and cybersecurity, or specifically large language models and cybersecurity, there was an interesting result out of Google recently where they have been investigating, like, to what extent are LLMs useful to detect bugs, right? On the defensive side, like, can we go into code and say, here's an exploitable vulnerability and fix it? And they actually did have their first result. They found a novel bug in code, that they would not necessarily have spotted, or I guess the issue is not so much they wouldn't have spotted, but it was spotted without human intervention, which makes it a much more scalable technique. So I think there's some promise there.